And now we're going to move straight into our evening's talk. And we've named it a culinary odyssey of land and ocean by Rishana Gray. And for those of you that were not here earlier, Jane Nashuti is unfortunately not able to join us this evening. So Rishana has got a lot of space, and I'm just going to do a little introduction to her quickly. Rishana Gray is the founder of Fulton Sea. Um, She merges her passions for wild food, creativity, earth, and ocean. She's based in Cape Point, South Africa, and she has developed immersive, award-winning experiences that connect people to nature through seasonal foraging and ocean-centered learning. Over the last 16 years, her teachings on edible plants and seaweeds inspire curiosity about the natural world. By engaging with the seasons and the cycles of nature, participants develop a deeper understanding of self, spirit, and science, perceiving these spaces as home and habitat to more than just humans with values that go beyond food. This hands-on multisensory methodology fosters a deeper connection and understanding of our natural world through a culinary and ecological lens. Situated against the Fynbos mountainside and nestled between the two oceans of the Cape Peninsula, Fulton Sea is an immersive education space offering wild food foraging workshops and unique nature-based events and experiences. Rishana writes, with nature as our classroom and food as the medium to share ecological knowledge, we hope to inspire reciprocal relationships with the land and the ocean as we track the edible landscape through the seasons and rediscover our local wild flavors. Rishana, it sounds all just so amazing. I've always been a fan of the work that you do, and once when I came gathering, harvesting seaweeds with you, it was just a very memorable experience that I will never forget. So yeah, the floor is all yours. Feel free to go ahead and share your. I'll stop sharing, and you can share your presentation.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It is an absolute joy to be here today and talk about one of my favorite subjects, edible seaweed. I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet. Thank you very much, Kirsten, for the intro. My name is Roshana, and I find meaning, purpose, and passion cultivating a curiosity for our edible landscape, whether it is at the ocean, in the forests, in the fields, in the veldt. And yeah, I founded Fulton Sea, a small nature-inspired business where I am right now in Cape Point, Cape Town. And this is where I've been living and working for the last 19 years. And at Fulton Sea, with our wonderful team of chefs and creative facilitators, we aim to inspire reciprocal relationships with the land and ocean. So the more we experience something, the better we can understand it, and the better we understand something, the more likely we are going to want to protect these blue and green spaces. Food is such a wonderful tool for teaching because it is something that we can globally connect to. And if we can start to look at the world through a culinary lens and also pair it and intersect it with an ecological lens, then anything is possible. And it's wonderful to have this shift and change in perception about how we are actually living in an edible landscape. So when it comes down to practicality for how to forage in the intertidal zone in the rocky shores, there are a lot of different rules and ways and whys. First and foremost, we must understand when we can enter this beautiful ecological space. And the way to do this is flowing with the moon. And while this sounds very hippie, it's actually very scientific. And as you can see on this little graph here, these are all the different moon phases and how it affects the Earth's tides. So around a new moon and a full moon, this is what is called a spring tide. And as you can see, with the Earth, the moon and the sun in alignment in the heavens, it creates a gravitational pull or tug on the Earth's waters. And so you get these very exaggerated tides that happen around the new moon or the full moon. So with the high tides, it is very, very high, and you'll find the waves and the ocean coming right up onto the sand dunes, and you'll often find these like beach cast kelp strewn high across the sand dunes, and that's because that's what happens around spring tides. And then 6 hours later, on the low tide, it exceeds far down across the rocks, exposing this beautiful and delicious slice of intertidal zone that we can then access on foot to forage for most delicious ingredients. There are another whole set of foraging fundamentals, and these foraging rules and regulations kind of shift and change according to wherever you are foraging from. But these are wonderful coastal foraging fundamentals that can be applied wherever you are in the world as well. So legality wise, this will change according to wherever you are. Here in South Africa, one legally needs a mollusk permit to gather both seaweeds and shellfish. And then we have to be very careful that we are not collecting from marine protected areas. These are no pick zones, obviously. Wonderful policies that have been put into place for great reasons. Something that's very important is knowing the ocean quality that you are collecting from. So sadly, these places and spaces are becoming fewer and fewer. The further away from the city, the better. But we just have to make sure that there's no pollutants in the ocean. And for seaweeds specifically, the reason why we need this is because seaweeds have a non-vascular system. So they have a little root or a holdfast, but it's not a root like a land plant. It doesn't get any nutrients from the root. It's just a little holdfast or an anchor that attaches itself to the substrate of a rock or the ocean floor. And then this non-vascular system means that it absorbs everything in the ocean around them into themselves. And so that means if there's any pollutants present in the ocean, it's going to be present in the seaweeds themselves. And it's nothing that we can pick up from sight or from taste. It's just a bioaccumulation that happens in our body. So we've got to make very informed decisions about where we are collecting from. And then your permits allows a certain bag size of various different species, but the golden foraging rule is only pick what you need and use everything that you pick. Also, never pick the first thing that you come across. One, you just don't know if it's growing in abundance. So these are very sensitive ecological spaces that we will be walking into when we are coastal foraging. Another great reason for this rule of never pick the first thing that you see is because it's going to, it's also going to be there afterwards. So it's a wonderful, sustainable rule. Then never collect any seaweeds that's floating around. You don't know when it last detached, so it could be at various stages of disintegrating. So anything that's floating around, you've got to think of as the compost, and seaweed makes wonderful compost. All right, so along our South African coastline, which is around 3,000 kilometers long, with a beautiful warm ocean up the east and a freezing cold Atlantic on the west, we have around 900 different species of seaweed, which is incredible. So it's almost as prolific and diverse as our land plants are, so are our ocean plants. And out of these 900 different species of seaweed, there's only one that you can't eat. So it is hugely underutilized source of food and nutrition when we think about it in terms of all of the goodness that it offers us. They are all full of vitamins, minerals, micronutrients, all available in a colloidal way. So we basically can absorb everything that they have to offer. So for want of a better explanation, they are a powerhouse of nutrition, and they are superfoods in their own rights. The one seaweed that you can't eat, everybody always asks this question, so I've put the slide up here. It is called Desmarestia firma, or commonly known as acidweed, and it's very, very interesting. It stores sulfuric acid in the vacuoles of its cells, And it's a wonderful design. So it prevents marine herbivores from eating it. Nature is amazing the way that it is designed. And so what happens to this seaweed is that when it gets washed up out of the subtidal zone and it gets damaged or it lands up on a rock, it starts leaching the sulfuric acid out of its cells. And you'll see on this photo here, I'm pointing at a beautiful little silhouette of this acid weed, where it's actually etched a little pattern of itself into the biomatter of the rocks. So it's a really beautiful thing to see when you are rock hopping on the beach next time. Please look out for this. Acid weed doesn't actually occur on the east coast, but it does occur on the west coast. So if you are out foraging or exploring the rocky shores on the Atlantic side, then do look out for these markings. So you definitely don't want to be eating the seaweed. It'll burn your digestive tract, but apart from this one seaweed, there are so many more out there. And out of all of these beautiful 900 different species, of course, not all of them are choice edibles. So on these wonderful workshops that we teach, we introduce you to our favorites and our choice edibles. There are some seaweeds that you can eat raw. There are some seaweeds that need a little bit of cooking preparation, whether it's to be flash fried or popped in your oven to be eaten as chips. Some of them are a little bit tougher and you can cook them like a pasta substitute or as a vegetable. They are also so beautifully full of vitamins, minerals, micronutrients. Some of them have high agar-agar properties, so you can use them as a vegetable-based jelly. Some of them are full of carrageenan, which is used commercially as a thickening agent. Yeah, so they are absolutely amazing. Then if I had to choose one seaweed to eat for the rest of my life, it would have to be kelp or Eclonia maxima. And this is because it is the most sustainable seaweed to be foraging. It is the largest seaweed that we have here in South Africa. It grows really fast and it is highly versatile when it comes to an ingredient in your kitchen. You can use the wonderful long fronds as a pasta substitute. Believe it or not, kelp lasagna is supremely delicious. You can use the stem or stipe to pickle. You can use the wonderful bulb to actually use as a cooking vessel. So there are many, many beautiful applications that one can use. Kelp has vitamin A all the way through to vitamin A all the way through to vitamin K, vitamin B12, which is very unusual in a plant. Potassium, magnesium, iodine, which is sorely lacking in our diets, which is really good for balancing our hormones and our thyroid. And it has glutamic acid, which is the natural MSG. Now, we all know what MSG is. It's that thing inside of the packet of chips that makes us eat the whole packet of chips at once. And it is a flavor enhancer. So anything that you use, anything that you cook and you add kelp to, it will really just switch it up to that next level of deliciousness because you're using a natural flavor enhancer. And it is also where that magical fifth flavor of umami comes from. And so you'll find umami in things like ripe tomatoes, dried mushrooms, walnuts. It's that deep, intense, savory flavor. And so this gets imparted into whatever you are cooking, whether it is sweet or savory. Here's some lovely practical applications with how to use seaweeds. On the left-hand side, there is a wonderful land and sea salad. In the middle, we love to use seaweeds to give a boost of flavor, but also nutrition into our ferments and into our preserves. And on the right hand side, there's kelp infused dashi broth that makes for a really, really wonderful health giving broth. And you can use whatever vegetables are in season as well as the ocean vegetables. On the left hand side here, you can see we're using a kelp bulb. as a cooking vessel. And this is a wonderful, very ancient indigenous practice that the Khoi use to cook with. And so because kelp is not flammable, you can actually use it as a cooking vessel. And after stuffing it with whatever you like, your rice, your vegetables, your seaweeds, you can put it straight onto the coals and it cook and steam. And in this photo here, we are using peaches. It's one of our favorite ways of cooking and steaming peaches for our desserts. We just add a little bit of fynbos flavored syrup in there. We stop at the top with a piece of kelp frond. You can also use some wet newspaper or a little rock to stop at the top, and then you put it straight on the coals. And as it cooks, it'll infuse with this beautiful umami flavor as well. In the middle picture, this is a sustainable sushi platter, and the purple curious object there is a kelp stem pickle, and it's been colored with beetroot. And on the right hand side, there's a lovely example of how you can use seaweed in sweet dishes, and this is a kelp and cocoa ice cream. So once you've established all your foraging rules and understood how responsibly and sustainably to be harvesting, something that I didn't mention in the foraging fundamentals is how to regeneratively forage your seaweeds, and this is very important. So you don't want to be pulling the seaweeds up, you just want to cut them with a knife or a little pair of scissors. The more seaweed you leave behind, the easier it is for the seaweed to regenerate. So we only really want to cut a third of the seaweed. And once you've harvested sustainably and regeneratively, then your seaweeds will stay fresh in your fridge for up to 5 days, just like a regular lettuce. Otherwise, if you want to store them for longer, you can simply dry them, and you can do this by hanging them on your washing line. You can put them in a dehydrator. The dashboard of your car in summer makes a wonderful dehydrator if you don't mind your car smelling like the beach. Or you can put them in a tray on a sunny windowsill. And you definitely want to sun dry them, and you don't want to compromise any of the nutritional value by putting them in the oven. Once they are 100% dry, you can store them in a sealed container for well over a year, so you can use them out of season as well. So the more we experience something, the better we can understand it. And so with this rising trend of connecting back to the source of our food, healthy eating and foraging, it's so incredibly vital to stress sustainable practices in both teaching and in sharing this knowledge and passing this knowledge on. And if we can look to the oceans not as a commodity, but as an ecological community to care for and respect and to connect with, then we can learn how to work and grow and play together in harmony and reciprocity with these beautiful blue spaces. Because as diverse and as delicate as these marine ecosystems are, so are the very many lessons available to us to learn in these spaces. And when we work with nature as our classroom, our subjects literally surround us on all sides, leaning in so generously, offering up subjects like physics, ecology, botany, gastronomy, oceanography, all in these beautiful multi-sensory lessons. And in this space, it is both easy to capture attention and allow for new knowledge to be absorbed and observed through these hands-on experiences. I love to use this slide in my talks because it is my daughter a couple of years ago having her my octopus teacher moment in the rock pools, and here she is observing an octopus trying to eat a crab. And when we spend time in nature, we start to develop and form relationships with nature, and we start to begin to understand all these interesting marine life and seaweeds in our natural surrounds. They share stories and offer up clues of wild flavor and food and of healing and community as well. And we become quite curious in these spaces, and we ask ourselves, so many questions that unlock so many interesting answers that we find ourselves returning to these spaces again and again to fill our minds and our hearts. And it is a really powerful space of learning, and not only about the natural world around us, but also about our own human nature. And we come home to ourselves and observe that there is spirit in the science and there is medicine in the magical space where the mountain slips into the sea. The last thing I want to just leave with you is a little video created by friends of mine over at Earth Agency, and it just encapsulates pretty much everything that I've spoken about. Enjoy. My name is Roshana Gray, and I'm the founder of Filtered Sea, where we track the edible landscape through the seasons, through wildly delicious and immersive experiences. I live in Cape Point. It's a very elemental space out in nature, and it really forces you to slow down. It's deliciously situated in between a mountainside and the ocean. In summertime, it's coastal foraging. In autumn and winter, it's land foraging. And in springtime, it's all about the flowers. On a new moon or a full moon, which are the spring tides, the low tide is super low, exposing this really magical slice of intertidal zone, which gives you maximum opportunity to explore and to collect all these different intertidal and underwater ingredients. And this quite literally feeds into my work. When you take adults to the rock pools, the intertidal zone, it's quite amazing to watch them change. They blossom into children again. Foraging has become quite popular and quite fashionable, and so it's very important for us to stress sustainability. I believe that the shorter that your food has to travel in terms of distance, then the more delicious and nutritious it is for you. It's such a rewarding thing to be so connected to your food. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshana. That was really super. Your imagery is, as I said before, absolutely beautiful. I would have very happily watched for another hour, actually. So I see that Johan has put your website in the chat, so that if anybody wants to get hold of you and experience your amazing workshops, they know where to reach you. I remember actually when I was on your workshop that when we took the kelp and we put it into boiling water, it went that brilliant, brilliant green. I remember that very clearly. Am I right?
Yes, that's right.
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah, nature is amazing, and seaweed is full of incredible things. And yeah, I don't know if anybody has any questions. I think there's some questions in the chat, maybe.
There was first a comment by Fran Gebhardt. I guess you know her. She says, "Hi, Roshana, aren't we lucky to have you as a neighbor?" From Fran in Scarborough.
Hi, Fran.
Um, Then there is Sibylla Riekmiller. She says, I guess tropical seaweed species may be different. For example, in East Africa, you don't see local people eating them traditionally. There are two species cultivated commercially and dried for export.
Yes. So, Seaweeds prefer a richer, more nutrient dense ocean. So you'll find more of a diversity of seaweeds along the Atlantic than the Indian Ocean. And there are some seaweeds that are commercially harvested, and that's probably because of their agar properties.
Okay. Yeah, I was actually curious, Rishana, about how our diversity of seaweeds compares to elsewhere. Do you know?
Yes, we are incredibly lucky. For comparison, Namibia, which is also kind of along the Atlantic, um, because it has a slightly warmer ocean, and even just like the currents coming from the east, um, they only have 100, just under 200 species of seaweed, as an example. Then I believe in the UK, I think there's around 400. The country, or the area with the most seaweeds is Australia, because they've got such diverse oceans. But yeah, we are incredibly lucky to have such diverse seaweed life.
Johanna, I see you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, Roshana. Thank you for that. It's really beautiful. So, Roshana, I know that we have the Mediterranean mussel on our South African or Western Cape shores, and that it's an invasive species. And as far as I know, that it threatens the local mussel species that occur here. Would it not be a rather selfless act of conservation action to go out and harvest as much as we can of the Mediterranean mussel and eat as much as we can of it? And should that not be encouraged in some way? Yeah, that's my
Absolutely.
first question.
Absolutely agree with you. And in fact, on our coastal forages, when we invite guests to teach them about the intertidal ingredients, we focus on identifying and harvesting the Mediterranean mussels only. It's quite difficult to tell them apart from our local black mussels, actually. Our local black mussels prefer, like, their situation is more in the sandy shore, so it's kind of closer up to the beach. The Mediterranean mussels have a very specific area where they live in the intertidal zone, and so yeah, we show how to identify and differentiate between the two. And yeah, we focus on picking and eating those. And so I think that's very, very important, because they've been introduced here, but in the ballast water and in the hulls of ships, and have infiltrated not only here but many other parts of the world. And they grow really fast, and they can outcompete our local mussels. So yeah, I think it's very important to be harvesting those.
Thank you. So, second question. I saw you cooking with a kelp. Like, I'm just trying to understand. Kelp is so common along the coast here. What would you typically cook in kelp? I'm trying to imagine the taste of that. What goes well with kelp?
Oh, anything, everything. You name it, I've eaten it with kelp or fused kelp into it. But are you talking specifically about the kelp bulbs?
Yes, and how? Because it looked like you created a cooking tool from almost like a pan from the kelp.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kelp. The kelp bulb acts as a float naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So you get this beautiful big holdfast or root, a long stem or stipe, and then this wonderful bulb that acts as a float, so that the fronds of the kelp can float at the surface of the sea and photosynthesize, right? And it's hollow inside. So yeah, you can use it as a cooking vessel. We've cooked so many different dishes inside there. We've cooked beautiful seaweed rice dishes. We've cooked couscous salad in there. Mussels are a great one as well, because essentially to cook mussels you need to steam them. But like I mentioned in the slideshow, we also love to poach fruit and cook sweet things in there. We've made wonderful syrups in there to make cocktails. So yeah, lots.
Sounds absolutely delicious. I don't know how many people have had their dinner already, but sounds very delicious. I see there's a wonderful question from Robert Lebes. He says, fantastic presentation. How valuable are seaweed in relation to medicine? Do we have any research that focuses on such?
Yes, there's lots of research happening with seaweeds and with our indigenous and endemic seaweeds as well, particularly with kelp. If you want to really get your minds blown, then Google fucoidin. It's amazing. I can't even start to talk about it here because then we'll be here until tomorrow.
How do you spell that, Rishana?
Fucoidan.
That sounds very interesting. I have a question for you. Obviously, your work entails you being a teacher. And I was just wondering, was it something that came naturally to you, or what was your sort of journey into being a teacher?
Yeah, thanks. That's a nice question. Well, I guess this work is an intersection of many different passions, food, art, and nature. And sometimes when you're incredibly passionate about something, you need an outlet. And I guess that's where teaching came into play. And I first started teaching kids, and I realized, and I was more focused on the wild food land plants. And I quickly realized that if you are teaching something in an that is a little bit strange and different, so introducing these forgotten foods, and yeah, then you need to really do it gently in a safe, nurturing environment, in a familiar context. So when we are teaching about seaweeds, for example, we're not going to show you some wild and exotic dish. We're going to be showing you something that is easily relatable. So we're going to be putting it on pizza or using it in a salad, or yeah, using it as a pasta substitute. So I think these little things are very important. And as I say, like when you use nature as a classroom, nature also becomes the teacher as well. So yeah.
It's well said. I see Yvonne Gillespie has written a question. Can one find seaweed in supermarkets?
Yes, one can. Depending on where you are in the world and what your supermarket is like, but the most common thing that you can get are the nori sheets, those squares that you can buy in the supermarkets, and you can use them for if you want to make your own sushi. That nori has been cultivated in Japan and has gone through a process to make it shiny and pliable and delicious. But yeah, we have nori on our very own shores here, our own version. So nori is called porphyra. It's from the porphyra species, and you get porphyra occurring all over the world. And the one that we get here is called porphyra capensis, and capensis meaning from the Cape or of the Cape.
I see that Yvonne has written that she is in Cape Town, born in Komaki, brought up on seafood. It just sounds right up her alley.
Love that.
Um, I was going to say that once I was in Ireland and they have something called a seaweed bath. I'm not sure if you've heard of those seaweed baths, but you get
Yes.
into a bath with hot water and lots of seaweed. And I guess you get a lot of iodine and other minerals and everything from being in the seaweed bath. But I can imagine that it is very well. I know that's from a personal experience. It feels like it is incredibly healthy.
Yes, yeah. So back in the Victorian times, seaweed bath houses were wildly popular. In fact, I think there's still a couple in Ireland, and basically it's a form of thalassotherapy. And what seaweed does when it hits fresh water is it starts to leach out its nutrients into the water, and so the water becomes quite thick and viscous. And our skin, which is obviously our largest organ in our body, can absorb all of those nutrients into our body. So it's a wonderful way. If you cannot wrap your head around eating seaweeds, you can still benefit from the nutritional value if you have a seaweed bar.
Seems that Marilyn Barrington would really love to benefit from cooking with seaweed. She says, "Is there a cookbook, a pamphlet, so that we know what and how to serve this, what to add, how long to cook it for, etc."
Yeah, so there are many, and I'm happy to send out a recommended reading list if anybody wants. But asking how to cook seaweed is like asking how do you cook vegetables. Every single seaweed has its own unique flavor profile, its own nutritional value, its own season. You get perennials, you get annuals, and its own texture. Texture plays a huge role. But yeah, there are lots of cookbooks out there. Otherwise, come and join one of our classes.
Yeah. Claire van Rain asks, "Is there any commercial farming of seaweed in South Africa?"
There is. They have just started a pilot project up on the West Coast. Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, a little bit further away from us, there is seaweed farming being done in Lüderitz in Namibia. But seaweed
Okay.
farming is on the rise, and there's lots of seaweed farms and even micro farms popping up all over the world. It's the cleanest form of marine
So see,
aquaculture.
it's okay. That's what I was just going to ask because my colleague CL Vaughan asks, "Is cultivated seaweed or mussels sustainable?"
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so if you think about this kind of coastal foraging is fine if it's done for recreational use, but once it's done on a commercial level, then anything that's from a is harvested from nature, it's not really a renewable resource when done on that scale. And so seaweed farming is the answer. And I firmly believe that seaweed farming is the future as well. It is the cleanest form of marine aquaculture. Yeah, it is amazing.
I see Claire continues the conversation. She says, "Seaweed and mushrooms, the way forward."
Yes,
Thanks,
I
Claire.
agree.
Okay, and then I've got a question. Oh, wait a minute. Johan's got his hand up and he's waiting very patiently. Johan?
Kristen, I'm going to come back to you. Sorry, my connectivity at the moment is very, very low.
Okay, no problem. Okay, that's fine. My other colleague, Letitia, she wants to ask about the nutritional value or the amount of B12 that's found in seaweed compared to, example, in meat. Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, it depends on which seaweed we're talking about. I would say kelp probably has the most vitamin B12, so that's the one that you want to be eating. But I do not know the answer as to which one would be better. But thank you for that question. I love a question that I don't know the answer to, so I'm going to find that answer out for you.
Rishana, so Letitia's giving you a big clap. Thank you. Rishana, there's a question from, or let me see if it's a comment or question from Claudia Roth. She says, talking about our human ancestors' food, always talking about hunters and gatherers, are there interesting studies concerning gathering kelp, etc., from the time before Homo sapiens or the first stages of our species? So perhaps an important ingredient of the Paleolithic age, too long ignored.
Yes, yeah. So there have been amazing studies that have been done along the East Coast, up near Stilbaai, ongoing studies. And I mean, there's lots of amazing articles that you can read about, but basically, this wonderful diet of omegas from the intertidal zone, both seaweeds and shellfish, paired with the geophytes and the bulbs and the corms of the fynbos, led to the cognitive change from early modern man, from caveman to early modern man, basically. So it's, yeah, it really formed a huge shift and change in our evolution, this beautiful diet.
And are you going to try?
Yes. Roshana, I would like to know, are there any species that we can harvest from the rocky shores that we should avoid for conservation purposes?
The thing about our rocky shores is that wherever we go, the species will shift and change. And so I think we just have to make very conscious decisions about when we step into a space to not be in a hurry and just gather whatever we can. Just spend a little bit of slow time in that space and observe and see, is there something that's growing prolifically and abundantly in that area? Then yes, these are the species that we should be harvesting. If you come across any species that are, there's only a couple of them, then rather leave them. But there are no rare and endangered seaweeds that I know about.
Thank you very much. And I would just like to encourage anybody who is visiting Cape Town or the Western Cape for the Christmas season, if you haven't visited the rocky shores, do spend some time during low tide. It is like visiting a coral reef on land. If you see all the magic that you see on so many television channels about coral reefs, but the rocky shores are equally magic. They're just absolutely amazing.
Thanks, Jan. Rishana, are there a lot of other people doing similar? I heard you say something about that there are quite a lot of other people doing foraging, but do they take a similar approach, or how you feel about the other people's approach, let's say?
Yeah, well, there are lots of foraging happening. There's lots of foraging happening all over. And I just hope that they are doing it sustainably and responsibly and regeneratively as much as they can, because as I mentioned before, it is a very sensitive ecological space. And I think something that we can look to is ancient indigenous practices, because those are always the most sustainable.
Thank you. I see that Fran Gebhardt, she said she couldn't resist Googling the B12 question. Seaweed has 30 to 60, I think it's micrograms per 100 grams versus beef, which is 1.6. So 30 to 60 versus 1.6. That's quite
Wow.
a massive difference. Yeah.
Amazing.
And she says it's health.com is the source.
Thanks, Fran.
I wanted to ask you, Roshana, maybe as a just a question. I know that you don't really wear a chef's hat, and I know I've just looked up what the name of a chef's hat is. I don't know if anybody knows, um, but it's a toque, TOQUE, which is very. I learned something. You rather have your wetsuit hoodie on your head or your goggles. But what is in store for your future? Do you have are you wanting to change anything about what you're doing?
You mean regarding Fulton Sea?
Yes, regarding Fulton Sea, yeah.
Yes. So yeah, we've got a wonderful team of about 15, with an incredible kitchen team with a head chef and a sous chef, and we've got incredible facilitators and educators. So Fulton Sea is its own little entity that, a beautiful educational hub. And next year I've just received news that I have been accepted as a fellow for women in the environment in Africa. So We Africa, I'm not sure if you've heard. So that's very exciting. That's my next step in leadership with conservation in mind.
Fantastic. Cool. We'll definitely have you back on again. It's very exciting. So I'm just seeing if there are any other questions. Maybe, Rishana, is there something that any of the questions have sparked anything else that you'd like to say?
Let's have a look at these questions here.
There's another question from
Ah,
Kagiso Rafaela. So,
yes.
are there any aquatic species that directly feed on seaweeds? And if there are any, could there be a possibility that seaweed farming might impact on such species? And that's from TUT, Shwana University of Technology. I think it's a student from TUT.
Yeah, there are incredible seaweed farming models. If anybody's interested, you can look up Bren Smith's Green Wave initiative. And basically, he has this wonderful open source model where it's a 3D underwater farming system basically, and it's not just one species either, so it's quite a few. And so, for instance, you can grow kelp and sea lettuce and mussels, so you can grow shellfish as well as seaweed. And these spaces, when you look out over the ocean, all you are seeing are these little buoys. So you can't actually see anything. Everything's under the water, and it becomes yeah, a wonderful kind of home and habitat as well for these marine creatures who do rely on it. It becomes like a little safe space for juvenile fish. And then, yeah, but it's much more sustainable than harvesting them from in the rocky shores as well. Something else that's very important that I didn't mention that I'd love to add is that seaweeds have a season. Some seaweeds grow year round like kelp, but there are other seaweeds, more of the softer ones that grow in the intertidal zone, that regenerate just like land plants in springtime. So and I'm talking particularly about the seaweeds here in the Western Cape. So when we have our Cape of Storms with a crazy wave bashing action that happens, a lot of the softer seaweeds gets ripped up out of the rock pools. And so in wintertime, we leave the seaweeds alone completely because there are so many other little marine creatures there that really rely on what's left over. All the little gastropods and all of the other little creatures. And then in springtime, slowly, they will start growing back. And then come summertime, the ocean gardens are full of sea vegetables. And that is the most ecologically sensitive time to be harvesting seaweeds. And that's why our coastal foraging season, this is a self-imposed rule. That's why we coastal forage from November, the end of November, until the end of March. And it's a wonderful way to kind of let everything regenerate. And so in this way, we're working with nature, not against it.
Super, Shana. I see that Claudia has got her hand up. Claudia, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Oh, there we go.
Luciana, you have to know that I'm a member of Rotary for now 25 years, and we have especially an action group for environmental sustainability. And we like to have talks like yours, and if you want to do it for us, it would be great help. So perhaps we can get into contact to see if it works out. Thank you so lot.
Thank you.
Super. I see Yusuf Adam has asked if you could please repeat the names of the writers that you mentioned.
The writers?
You mentioned, oh no, I'm not, was it something, the blue wave or green wave?
Bren Smith, and his initiative is called Green Wave.
Green wave.
And he has a book out as well called Eat Like a Fish. And just that title is so wonderful because if we unpack it, we're so programmed to believe that if we need our omegas, we need to eat fish. But actually, fish can't synthesize their own omegas and they get it from their diet, which is seaweed. So if we eat like a fish, we'll be fine.
I see that Claudia's put her details into the chat, Roshana, but I can send that on to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Claudia.
Right. I'm just looking for any other questions. I've gone through the chat, so I think we've covered all the questions on the chat. If anybody else would like to raise their hands or write in the chat, that would be super. Okay, here we have a question from Sibylla. Hi, good evening. Let me unmute you.
Hello, Roshana. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I put a question in the chat quite early. I mean, I just loved your photos and they look so pristine, landscape, wonderful. I think it's very hard to find, at least in our part of the world, having such vistas without plastics around, massive plastic pollution. So I just wonder how you manage to basically find places which are not polluted with lots of plastic bottles and other debris and the sand mixed with micro and nanoplastics, which in our part of the world is caught by mangrove forests. So they catch the plastics easily. So how do seaweeds not also function as filters for plastics pollution that is get caught there, breaking up by the waves or so? You don't seem to have that problem. How comes?
I think we're incredibly lucky here. We still have some relatively pristine shores here in South Africa. It's not the case all of the time. And yeah, when it comes to microplastics, seaweeds are interesting where they don't absorb them into themselves. But they can adhere to the outside of them. So that's why it's very, very important to make sure that the ocean you're collecting from is clean. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that your areas are polluted.
I see that there's a fantastic comment from or question from Johan about which wine pairs best with kelp, white or red?
That's a great question, actually. White, and I would say a good Chardonnay or a Chenin. Something that is naturally mineral rich in taste.
So I'm picturing my whole team around a long table with you and lots of seaweed and wine. Cool. Thanks, Roshana.
Lovely.
I'm not
Thank you.
sure whether we have any more questions. Sybil, have you got another question? No, she's disappeared now.
Oh, that's it. That's
oh, here we go. Kahisa, again from TUT. Would kelp be enjoyable with pap?
Very much so. I have eaten this and it's really delicious. So as I was saying, kelp is a flavor enhancer. So it's going to make your pap taste absolutely incredible and also put a boost of nutrition into it as well. And you can eat it like a vegetable. So it's a win. It's a great pairing.
Sure. Kelp for everything. Thanks, Roshana. It's been really a pleasure to have you speak with us. And yeah, absolutely delicious recipes and everything. I think well, I'm sure some people will be in touch with you to learn more and hopefully to participate in some of your workshops.
Yeah, if anybody would like to get in touch, you can find us on Instagram at Felt and See, VELDANDSEA. Otherwise, the website, I think Johan put it in there. It's very easy, www.feltandsea.com. Yeah, or Facebook. If anybody's still on Facebook these days, you can find us on Felt and See. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you and connecting. Thanks.
Thanks, Roshana. I see that John Hanks had all kinds of thumbs up and clapping to you. And I see that Fran has said, thank you so much. Your workshops are legendary. And Claire says, thanks all. Very interesting, considered and mouth-watering. And Letitia says, great presentation. Thank you. I've learned so much. So with all of that, yes, bid you a fine evening. And thank you very, very much.
Pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to present. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to the unlucky audience.
Yeah, I hope this has left you hungry for more information.